to a Hope 1032 podcast.
Hello, welcome to Season 5 of Raising Teens. I'm your host, Collett Smart. I'm a psychologist, a teacher, and also a parent in the middle of raising my own teen and young adult children. I started this podcast because I know that many teens are struggling, and I wanted to create an online village of support for parents. I'm joined again this season by well-known experts on teen mental health and well-being. I have such hope for this generation of young people, so each episode is jam-packed with support so that you can get on with the job that you do best. That is, connecting with and loving your teen. Please be advised that this episode contains discussions around suicide, self-harm, and mental health. We recommend that parents listen to this on their own and then, using your discretion, share parts or all of this episode with your teen. Suicide is a topic that affects many people, and there are many different aspects to it. Suicide does have far-reaching effects on those left behind. This episode is specifically for adults who are supporting a teen who has lost a parent to suicide. In future episodes, we will be looking at suicide from other perspectives, specifically friends, peers, and teens at risk themselves. If you know someone who is supporting a teen who has lost a parent, whether it be a school counselor or a grandparent, we encourage you to share this episode with them as well. I'm starting this episode with Dr. Zac Seidler, who is a returning guest on the podcast. We heard from him in Season 4, Episode 3 on boys' mental health. Zac is a clinical psychologist, the Director of Mental Health Training at Movember, and a Senior Research Fellow with Origin at the University of Melbourne. Here, Zac helps us understand the importance of language and the words that we use when talking about suicide.
So we used to use the term, and it is still, to my extreme discomfort, thrown around a bit, but the term commit suicide was directly related to the fact that suicide used to be a criminal act, hence the word commit, as if, a crime has been committed. And so commit suicide is no longer the terminology that we use, thankfully, because, suicide is no longer a criminal offense in this country. It must be said that it is still a criminal offense in a number of countries, whether that be Indonesia, Malaysia, most of the Middle East. There's a lot of countries where it is still illegal. So as a result, we dropped the commit. While it still exists in some articles and some TV shows, I hope that will not be the case for a long time. And instead, we say suicided as a verb, or we say took their own life. Those are the two terms that I tend to use. And while it's difficult, as with lots of language at the moment that is, people are finding really difficult to adapt to, it's really important because for those who are bereaved, they do not want to feel like their partner or their husband or their father has committed anything. Rather, it's a matter of respecting, the suffering that they went through.
Mindframe.org talks about using words such as non-fatal suicide rather than using unsuccessful suicide, or things like a person died by suicide. If someone says their partner died from a mental illness or died because of their mental health, can you just talk about using that terminology, died by mental health or died by mental illness?
That's a very complex and very personal description, which is that people make meaning of grief in many different ways. And so especially when it comes to suicide, which is something that is just filled with uncertainty and a lack of answers, really, those who are left in the wake of the suicide are often left to pick up the pieces and try to understand and incorporate it into their life moving forward. As a result, for some people, it is easiest for them to link it directly with if they had ongoing chronic depression or schizophrenia or something else in their lives. It makes more sense for the person left behind to express it and explain it in a way whereby an illness killed them. While I don't necessarily believe that to be the case, because there is no such thing as a terminal mental health issue, I don't believe in the inevitability by any means of, depression, for instance, leading to suicide. I'm not going to tell anyone if they've lost someone what they can and cannot say. But, when I think about people in my own life and clients who I've lost to suicide, in many ways, from the moment I met them, I knew that it was highly feasible. I knew that it was something that was within, I've had clients who've told me, I won't live to 30. It's just not going to happen. And I've come to terms with that, and that's okay. And it's as if they have pancreatic cancer, and they've got 6 months to live. That's just the way that they frame it. Now, we talk about zero suicide as a goal for humanity. I have little belief that that will ever happen. Suicide has been around since ancient Greece and will continue to be around. It's a matter of reducing the chances of this happening rather than believing that we can get rid of it altogether, because when we talk about zero suicide, it kind of ends up alienating those who have lost someone by saying, we're going to work it out. We're going to get rid of it. It's going to be great. Rather than we tried everything that we could, hopefully, with the person that you lost, and we are going to continue to strive for better outcomes because we haven't done enough.
My other guest on this episode is Sharon Witt. Sharon has been an educator in Australian schools for 3 decades and is a highly sought-after media commentator on issues impacting our young people, their parents, and educational issues. Sharon is a best-selling author of 18 books written for young people to help guide them through many of the issues they face in early years, including her best-selling Girl Wise and Wise Guys series, Teen Talk, and Starting Secondary School, which is co-written with Dr. Michael Carr-Gregg. Sharon is also the founder of the National Resilient Kids Conference and the Wellbeing Boxco organizations that aim to contribute positively to the well-being and mental health of young people around the country. Hi, Sharon. It's so good to see you again. You and I haven't seen each other for quite a while now because of COVID. And I actually just saw recently that your Resilient Kids Conference is starting up again. Yay! In person.
Yes, I'm so excited. It has been 2 years at least since we've been able to run the conference with real life people. Last year we were able to run it, but it was all virtually. So it is really nice to be able to come together. But I don't know about you, but I still feel that sense of, I guess I'm a little bit unsure. I feel like since COVID, we're feeling like things might be coming back to how they used to be, but you just don't know, do you?
Yeah, I think we're just unsure all the time. But it's really fun. I've done some parenting seminars already this year, and it's just so good to see people's faces, and you get a sense of what the audience is feeling, and it's just been so good to be back. I also have to say, 18 books, Sharon. Every time I see you, I feel like you've written more books. You're like a rock star, in my opinion. It takes me so long to write a book. You were one of my biggest cheerleaders, if not the biggest professional cheerleader for me for my book, where I didn't feel like I could get it out. And you sat there in the coffee shop near my home, looked at my draft. So, 18 books, Sharon. You're amazing.
Well, thank you. But likewise, you have helped me a lot too. I know that in my journey, you were there to listen to some of the really tough stuff. So it goes both ways, Collett. I'm happy to be your cheerleader, and definitely very happy to do so.
Yeah, Sharon, you mentioned the tough stuff, and that's our topic for today. I was there with you the first time your husband made an attempt on his life, and you had to get back to your kids, and you were rushing home from Sydney. I know this topic can really be quite heavy, and I know no matter how many times you talk about it, I've seen you get emotional. I'm okay with you being emotional on the show. You're very real, Sharon, and I appreciate that. And this resilient teens expert that you are, you've had to walk this. You've had to walk trauma with your own kids and trauma in your own life. So just tell us a little bit about your story, Sharon.
Do you know what? I've forgotten until that moment that you were actually there. You were actually about to come to pick me up. we were attending a book launch together. And I think I had to message you and say, I don't even know what I said. I have to go home. I was actually at a friend's house waiting for you to come and pick me up to head off. And I got a phone call from my son, and it was the most traumatizing phone call I've ever had in my life. And at the other end was my 16-year-old son at the time, screaming down the phone saying, I think Dad's died. And I could hear my mum in the background on the phone to the ambulance and trying to get my husband going. And she's used to be a nurse, an emergency nurse, and she was in nurse mode. And it was probably the most harrowing day, apart from when we actually did lose Andrew. Probably it's really stuck in my mind because I felt so hopeless on the other end of the phone. I was in Sydney and my son was in Melbourne and home with my mum and my daughter when they found Andrew. And he was very lucky to come through that. But it was just awful being in another state. And I was at the airport within probably 45 minutes and put onto a flight with Virgin. And the phone call I had just before I boarded the flight was he's breathing for himself. And I did not know what I was going to face when I got on the other end, when I got off the plane. And so I remember just sitting on the plane, and they were so wonderful. They put me down the front and I just cried the whole way. And I just remember thinking, I don't know what's going to be at the other end. What am I about to face? There was really no warning. My husband had had some bad anxiety the week previous, maybe 2 weeks before, to do with work. And the black dog had kind of consumed him over that week, and he wasn't sleeping, and he'd been to the doctors and they gave him sleeping tablets. He went back a few days later. They gave him some more different ones, and he was just in an anxious state. And he'd actually had mental health issues before I met him. I wasn't aware of that when he was about 20, 21, and he was now over 40. So basically it came back after 20 odd years. We've been married for 20 years. We'd actually just celebrated our 20th wedding anniversary 10 months earlier, and we'd renewed our vows in Fiji on an island, and things were wonderful. And about 10 months later, he got hit with this horrendous anxiety and depression that he just could not navigate it. So that was really, was it a cry for help? I don't know, because he did leave a letter. And so, yeah, I think he literally just wanted to go to sleep and not wake up. And that was the first of 5 more attempts.
I remember. And then Sharon, he did eventually end his life. And that was really something that you had to navigate then with your own children. And, as a professional woman yourself, you were trying to do your business. We know that there are over 3,000 suicides in Australia each year, and males are 3 to 4 times more likely to take their own life than females. And suicide is the leading cause of death for young people between 15 and 24, and it's even twice as high in Indigenous populations. I also asked Zac to weigh in on current research on men's mental health.
So at the moment within Australia, we are losing on average 7 men a day to suicide. That amounts to over 2,000 men a year, and that statistic has not moved very, very far in the past decade or so. Middle-aged men continue to be the most problematic when it comes to these statistics, in that these numbers are continuing to rise in that age bracket, which is very interesting because it's kind of followed them. When they were teenagers in the 90s, the suicide rate took a massive upwards tick, and it's actually followed that generation all the way through. And we think it's probably because of some economic downturns that happened in the 90s that led to an impact on the protector-provider traditions that are within masculinity, and they didn't feel like they were able to live up to the standards of their fathers, for instance. All of that aside, the suicide rates in Australia are staggering and are, uniquely high in that they directly interacting with modern day masculinity, I think, in many ways. The way that men are taught to be in our country, the idea of what a man looks like and how they should act is very much tied in with the idea of a stoic, self-reliant, strong, powerful guy. And that is in direct contradiction with help seeking, with putting out your hand and going, somebody give me a hand, someone help me out. So when it comes down to it, the way that suicide looks and how it happens in many men is extremely complex. I've interviewed hundreds of people who've attempted suicide and the bereaved of people who have suicided, and it looks very different in many of them. In saying that, there are lots of themes that you can kind of pull out here and there, often around situational stresses rather than mental health difficulties per se, which is to say financial difficulties, relationship breakdown, job loss. These types of situations can have serious ramifications on men's well-being, and we just don't have the supports in place at the moment that wrap around these guys in these really important moments. And so these difficult situations, you add poor coping mechanisms that many men have, which is substance misuse. They're socially isolated very often. You end up with a pretty bad melting pot of components that are going to see this statistic continue to stay as high as it is in some ways, unless we do things a little differently.
And so what were people's reactions to you, and what did you find really helpful and really hurtful? Just to give our listeners some idea of how do you respond with compassion in that situation?
Absolutely. Look, there's a few things to note. Andrew had, we almost lost him 6 months earlier to when he finally passed away. And I was the one who was helping him with that. We had police and ambos there. And I remember the police saying to me, eventually you need to be prepared, he may well be successful. And I was in a bit of a blur, but 6 months later, I was actually meant to meet him for coffee that day that he'd passed away. And the language that I use is, and this is a very helpful thing for me, I just say he lost his battle with depression. And I also just say that he passed away from mental illness, which is actually true. I've never used the words he committed suicide. I've just said my husband passed away from mental illness. And for me, that is true because for those who are suffering depression, it is a battle in their brain. Like their brain is really unwell. Their thinking is unwell. And often there's a chemical imbalance, and he'd battled for 6 years. So the language I use is that he passed away from mental illness, and people know what that means. It's like he had a brain cancer. How do people react? I would have to say that people have acted with such compassion and kindness, always. I don't think I've actually had anyone, and I have a very wide circle of friends and acquaintances and professional people that I work with, and no one has ever said anything nasty or unkind or unhelpful. The only thing that I could think that, I don't know if I've heard it myself, but I know that sometimes people will say, well, at least they're in a better place now. And I actually do know that he was living a very difficult, unhealthy, he had no joy in his life. There was no joy. And so wherever he is now, yes, he's free from that. He's free from that anguish of every day. But if you want to say to someone, oh, well, they're in a better place now, that doesn't make it any easier on you. What really helped me was the times that Andrew did try and attempt on his life, or when he was just in a really bad place, people would just say to me, I'm really sorry you're going through this. This is horrible. Look, I'm really sad. I'm sorry that you're going through this. That was kind of, because people can't fix it. And I think that's one of the things that is really helpful, to sit in it with someone when someone is going through caring for someone with a mental illness or someone who does have a mental illness. A helpful thing to say is, I'm really sorry that I'm really sorry you're going through this right now. Rather than saying, oh, let's fix it, say, I'm really, really sorry that this is what you're going through, and just be with the person. I mean, for me, as someone who, I call myself a suicide survivor, because really, I've survived my partner taking his life. The best thing for me, my principal of my school actually did this, and it was amazing. She knew that what I needed at that moment when the police called her and said that Andrew had passed away, she actually went to the classroom and took out two of my best friends who are also teachers and just said to them, go grab your stuff and I want you to go to Sharon's and you're not to come to school for the next 2 days. I just want you to be at Sharon's home, because she knew that I needed people around me. She just knew. And so I guess the main thing is to know what that person needs. For some people, they might have a good support network or whatever it is. I just needed people around me and also around my kids.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. So in your work with young people around Australia, you've cared for a lot of teenagers in many ways. I know you still work in schools and you love and support teenagers. How did you support your own teens? And keeping in mind, I suppose, that they would have needed different care to each other and possibly different care to you. What did that look like in your home?
That is such a good question, Cole, because both myself and our two young people who are now 21 and 25, they were 18 and 22 at the time, both reacted in different ways. And for me, I needed to talk about it. I had my friends around me and I just needed to talk and get all that out. Interestingly enough, one of my teachers, my friends, who came and stayed with us for a week, she actually used to be the grade 3 and grade 4 teacher of my daughter. So she was her past teacher, but they also had a really close relationship. She was her year 12 mentor. And so for my daughter, she didn't want to talk about anything. She just needed her person around her. And she didn't want to talk about it at all. My son, he had some good mates around him that just were around. So some people need to talk about it, some people don't. For me, it was about just allowing them to be and do whatever they needed. So for me, I went straight into having some therapy with a psychologist almost immediately. My school said it was mandatory, but also I knew I'd been seeing a psychologist before in the years leading up to Andrew's passing to help me navigate caring for someone with a mental illness and dealing with the multiple attempts. It's very healthy, I think, to seek help for yourself. I'm a big advocate for that, having a professional. So I did. I wanted that also for my daughter. She wasn't up to that at all. She did not want to talk about it. She closed right up. And as much as I wanted her to see a psychologist, that wasn't what she wanted and thought that she needed. And it took about a year and a half until she one day said to me, I'm ready. Could you make an appointment? So for me, it was allowing that space of whatever she needed to do. And my son has talked to mates. He says he talks to his mates often, and he has not seen a professional that I know of. So we've all processed it in different ways. And I think the most important thing that I would say is there's no one size fits all. I think we can't force what we think on someone else, how we think they should be dealing with it. I find great solace in going up to the cemetery and sitting by the place where Andrew's remains are. I go up, I put flowers, I sit and chat to him, I write cards, I talk to him. For me, that's really healthy. One of our kids has never been up there and doesn't even want to know where that place is. And the other one has gone up maybe a couple of times. Everyone's different and there's no right or wrong when you're dealing with grief.
I so appreciate your honesty in that, Sharon, and just calling out how people process grief differently. There's no cookie cutter way of processing. Everybody's going to process it differently and their memories differently. We just heard Sharon's perspective on losing a partner to suicide. Here Zac also talks with us about losing his own dad to suicide when he was younger.
So it's a complex one and something, that I continue to reflect on how I got to where I am. But the simple answer is that I lost my dad to suicide 10 years ago or so. It's pretty crazy how time passes. And it was 2013, and dealing with that type of grief and trauma in many ways. I was overseas at the time, and reflecting on the loss of a role model and a father figure in many ways, has had very profound ramifications on my life and my family's life, obviously. But, in saying that, I was already on the road to becoming a psychologist. It was, gender and the way that young men interacted in the world was always something that intrigued me. And so, if anything, losing my dad just lit a fire in my belly and got me on the road to, further pursuing this stuff and seeking answers more fervently, I think, than probably I would have if not to have lost him. And in many ways as well, while, there is no positive outcome to such a loss, there are certain silver linings where I get the ability to interact and speak with, on podcasts like this and get to share my experience and what I went through. And so, hopefully my dad's suffering wasn't in vain, and I get the ability to, to hopefully just take away some of the pain that others are feeling and let them know that they're not alone and that there are many options to help you get through those dark times.
Thank you. And so what are some of the signs or symptoms we look for when we're looking at older men or middle-aged men, dads, that look different to women and girls?
So specifically, we should be looking for those situational stresses, which are if they've lost a job, if they're about to go through a divorce or a widowed, or they're having financial difficulties. Those are all immediate red flags. To not suffocate him with support, but to really jump in as friends, as family members, and to make it very clear that he is not alone. Because what happens often in those circumstances is that they feel like they've failed, and so they distance themselves. So social isolation is probably the greatest, precursor and suggests that something is up. So if they're suddenly not seeing anyone, they're staying home all the time, or they're too anxious to suddenly go and interact with others, that's very worrying. In saying that, the opposite is also important, which is that if they have been depressed for a very long time and then suddenly one week they just snap and are going and meeting up with all of their friends, I've seen in too many instances that is often a way for them to say goodbye. Do not be afraid of talking about suicide with somebody, regardless of whether you think that it might happen, whether you think that they've thought about it. No harm will come from you asking them if they have thought about harming themselves or have thoughts of suicide. You'd be very surprised how often you're having banter with one of your friends and it's back and forth, and then you just say, mate, I'm just worried about you, just wondering. And it feels like a very extremely heavy S word to drop in, but it's like, and you can talk about it. It's like, I've had these thoughts. The vast majority of humanity goes through life and thinks about this stuff every once in a while. It shouldn't be demonized. It shouldn't be something that we are so afraid to talk about that we end up at a funeral instead.
Do you have any advice for a parent of a teenager who has a friend or a loved one who has died by suicide? What are your few tips that you would give in supporting your teenager?
So as someone who has lost someone to suicide, I can actually speak from this firsthand as well. When I was 20, my best friend passed away by suicide. He was 19, and that was my very first ever experience of someone even having a mental health issue. The thing that I found hardest at that time was I didn't really know. My parents at the time had no idea how to deal with that. So they didn't talk about it. They never spoke. They never mentioned his name. So I was basically stuck in my room listening to records at the time that we used to listen to together, and I didn't have a place to deal with it. And I was in my final year of university. So what I would do is go up to his parents' place and just sit with them and cry. So I think as a parent, my best advice would be don't not talk about the person. Give your children every opportunity to talk about that person if they want to. Everyone's grief journey is differently. Look, it took 2 years before my kids were happy for my husband's photo to be back up in the family room, like in a frame, because it was just too confronting. So for the first year or two, any photos, any memorabilia, anything had to be in my bedroom. My daughter in particular just said, just keep it in your room, Mum. So my room was like all the mementos of my husband and photos, but it took a while before my daughter felt okay for that to be out there. And the other thing too, which you don't often think there are often reasons why our kids react in certain ways. So, for example, when Andrew passed away, the whole family room and kitchen were full of flowers and cards, like full of them. And I only found out recently. So if I ever get flowers delivered, my daughter moves them down to my bedroom or in the front lounge room, not in the family room. And I used to say, I don't understand. Why are you moving flowers? Someone sent me flowers for my birthday and you've got to put them in my room. And it's only recently that she admitted to me, Mum, it takes me back to that time. Whenever I see bought flowers in the family room, it reminds me of that was filled with flowers. And I just never thought about that. So I think for us as parents, just be open-minded and allow space for your child to talk if they want to. Ask them what their favourite memories are, or ask them, is there anything that you can do or help with, and offer them the opportunity to have some counselling. I think if my parents had have offered me some counselling, I probably would have taken them up on that, because I think it would have been helpful. I had nowhere to go with my grief except just to cry and listen to records in my room, but I didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah, and I wonder if, as you're talking about the passage of grief, that parents continue to offer that. I don't mean every week or every month, but remind their children that they can still access counselling a year down the line or 2 years down the line if that is when they are ready. And I think we so often hear still, unfortunately, the words, you should be over that by now, or, are you through your grief yet, kind of thing. And can you speak into that a little bit? Advice for what we can do when someone has a loved one who has passed away 2 years ago, not expecting them to hurry through their grief.
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, I'm part of a grief group online, and it's really helpful. The one thing is, I would say to anyone, grief is not linear. It's just not linear. You would think that there'd be a passage of time where you'd go through and you'd go, I'll get to this stage, then I'll get to this stage. It doesn't work that way. There can be days where it feels like yesterday, and there can be other things that, will take me back, and I'll go, wow, it still feels to me like we lost Andrew, last week, yet it's been just over 3 years. But, for everyone, it's different. And sometimes little things will remind me, or I could be perfectly fine. And a lot of the time I'm perfectly fine talking about it, because it is important to share our stories. I'm a big believer in that. And if it helps one person, then I always will. But there are still some times when I might be talking to someone and the tears just come, and it wells up, and they say, oh, I'm sorry about that. But the one thing I would want to say is, don't ever not talk about the person. I think the hardest thing for someone who's going through grief of losing a loved one is if people don't mention their name because they're worried about upsetting them. I can tell you right now, people would be more upset that you don't mention their name than if you did. People want to remember the grief, and not the grief, they want to remember the person. And when you say, I really miss Andrew, and you go, oh, thank you for saying that. Look, I love it when people say, I really miss him. Or even just on the weekend, we were with Andrew's sister and brother-in-law, and we were talking, and his sister was saying, laughing about the things that Andrew and I used to do, and the quotes. We used to speak in movie quotes all the time, and it was just, the kids were listening and we were just laughing, and it was so lovely to be able to talk about him with really great memories. And I think, one of my colleagues, I remember when she lost a child, and the child was born early and stillborn, and she had huge medical issues that were incompatible with life. And we knew this baby was going to be born, passed away. And I remember months later talking to this colleague and saying, how can we help? And she said, just please always speak her name. Ask me about her. Just don't pretend she didn't exist. And I think that was really helpful for me to remember. She did have a first child. She's now got another 2 boys, but she also was a mum of a baby girl.
Yeah, and that I'm so glad you've mentioned that, because I remember some years ago talking to a mum whose daughter passed away, and I just happened to mention her daughter's name, and the first time it struck me how important a person's name is was when she got tearful, and she said to me, thank you for saying her name. I haven't heard someone say her name in months. And that's really profound. So thank you for reminding me of that, Sharon. So Sharon, what do you do now for self-care as a mum who lost their husband? What do you do to look after yourself in times when you need it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I see a psychologist regularly, once a month, which is really important for me to be able to just, deal with any grief that's coming up, especially because it's been 3 years. We're still dealing with the coroner, which it takes a long time. And there was some, care leading up to Andrew passing that is still being investigated. So that's still there. So it's really important to have someone to talk to that's a professional. I make sure that I get plenty of sleep. I am a classic overachiever. I work a lot. I run a few businesses. And so for me, it's really important to look for the triggers for me that I might be doing too much. So I make sure that I rest when I can. And I try and eat well. Don't always do that so well. And I also laugh a lot. And I do things with my children, our children. They both still live at home, and we do a lot together, and we make sure that we laugh, and we make sure we talk about Andrew as well. We laugh about funny things, and we bring up his memory, and we do talk about him. But for my own self-care, I would say just making sure that you look after yourself mentally as well, and seek help. There's been times where I've actually called a suicide support line, as in, for people that have lost someone to suicide. I've called Lifeline once when I was just in absolute despair. I called them just to say, I don't know how to go through this or keep going. And the counsellor was amazing. So there is no stigma in calling helplines. That's what they're there for. So I make sure that, and also I make sure if I'm really struggling at a time, I call on a very close friend and I will talk to them, or they'll come over.
What advice do you have to support teenagers in our audience who are left behind? And obviously you spoke about your own experience, so that's actually quite profound.
It is so different for every person. The circumstances are so different. I went through an experience where my dad, had suffered with depression for a very long time. So while it was still completely out of the blue when he took his own life, it's very different to someone who has no conceivable mental health difficulties and takes their own life. I was also 20, which is a very different age to 12 to 16, for instance. I had an understanding of who I was and what was going on, and I had a foundation to build on. So that would be my first port of call, is to help them find someone who is going to be a stable force in their life, a role model or otherwise, a mentor, someone who is going to provide them with the light at the end of the tunnel, someone who's going to laugh with them, someone who's going to show them what life is capable of offering them. And the thing that I was allowed was to find what I loved, and was to build my skills in places that may not have been, what was wanted from me. But the openness and the freedom, I think, in those who have lost, a parent specifically, the depth of feeling that we gain if we are offered the space to do so is profound. And it goes one of two ways, really, which is that hopefully after the fact there is space where you can speak about this person, and you can understand, that they didn't hate you, and that there was no, if anything, what I've come to terms with is that it was in a sick way, really, because that's what depression does. It was an act of love by my own dad, because he believed himself to be such a burden. And so while, yes, we'd love him to be alive and to tell him that was not the case, I have tried to find meaning in the fact that he believed that he was, doing something out of love for all of us, because he thought that he was sapping us all of energy and, in looking after him, etc. So you will never find answers for this. So seek out people like yourselves. I think find a community of people that you can actively speak to about this stuff, who aren't going to run away when you say suicide, and own your story. I think is really important. You don't need to go into the mental health field. It's not for everyone. It can be damn exhausting every once in a while, but just having people, whether it's a partner or otherwise, who you feel able to talk to about this stuff and let it be a part of your personality. Don't shy away from it, because it can end up being a strange and unwanted superpower in many ways. You know, I used to hate funerals, and now I'm the guy who goes to funerals and knows exactly what to say because I've been through it myself. And so provide support, give back where you can't to the person who's no longer there. And I think that there's a lot to be said for just one step in front of the other.
Before we go, I just wanted to finish with a quote by the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare. Every life lost to suicide is a tragedy, and the impacts on family, friends, and communities are profound. Although suicide and intentional self-harm are complex issues, they can be prevented. If you found yourself feeling distressed at any point of this episode, please reach out to Lifeline on 13 11 14 for our Australian listeners, or your local helpline if you are elsewhere around the world. Please also refer to the numbers we have provided in the show notes, and if anyone is in immediate danger, please call 000. I was really moved by Sharon's story about Andrew and how important it is to say the person's name when we talk to family and friends. Both Sharon and Zac reminded us that everyone processes their grief differently. If you would like to find out more about Sharon's books and resources for young people, you can find her at sharonwitt.com.au. Zac's work can be found at zacseidler.com. There are also more links in the show notes. You can also find me at raisingteens.au. If you have a question about raising your teen, please contact me via email or my Facebook page, or you can go to the Hope 1032 podcast page. In the meantime, keep parenting with your teen's future adult in mind.
This episode was hosted by Collett Smart, edited and produced by Alec Green, imaging by Lucy Weil, and social media by Beth Rivers.
Hope 1032. Thanks for listening.